If you look at the history of Islam, you will find the beauty that lies in its teachings. If you take the example of Hazrat Aisha radhiyallahu anha, who herself was a scholar. She was known as the scholar of scholars. Why? Because she taught 88 great scholars of the time, and there were many more that she taught. So she taught the alims of Islam, the religious scholars of Islam. So then she was the scholars of scholars, 1400 years ago. She had profound knowledge of medicine. Whenever foreign delegations would come to the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and discuss various remedies for illnesses, she used to remember them. In mathematics, she was extremely well versed. So well versed, in fact, that Sahaba at that time, may Allah be pleased with them, used to consult her on the problems concerning inheritance and the calculation of shares. She was an expert of ahadith. She narrated over 2,200 ahadith and had memorized many more. Abu Musa al-Ashri himself, who was a famous jurist and learned scholar, said about Hazrat Aisha radhiyallahu anha that whenever we, the companions of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, encountered any difficulty in the matter of any hadith, we referred it to Aisha and found that she had definite knowledge about it. So imagine the status that she possessed in that time, when women all over the world were regarded as nothing more than slaves or second-rate citizens. Imagine her status in society, that men, learned men, came to seek knowledge from her. Another example is that of Safiya radhiyallahu anha, who was wife of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who was also very learned in fiqh or jurisprudence. And Imam An-Nawawi says about her that she was the most intellectual among learned women. So she was extremely intellectual and had a very sharp brain, very sharp mind. There are many, many other examples of women, great learned, scholarly women in Islam that you can find. Salma, Fatima bint Qais, Salim, the mother of Anas, Sayyidah Nafisa, the granddaughter of Hussein, may Allah be pleased with them all. And many, many other learned women who came in Islam. And for the women of our times, it is a great encouragement to see how Islam can actually be implemented and used for a positive thing. And then these women become great role models for our women as well. Not following every woman that you find on TV, but following the real scholarly women who actually added value to society. If you look at the economic rights of women, you'll find that in Islam, the man has been made the guardian of the family, he is the protector of the family, and the bread earner in the family. These are certain positions that Islam has created for man and woman. This does not mean by any means that a woman cannot work. She can, but there is something great about that as well. Before a woman is married, it is the duty of the father or the brother to provide for her lodging, boarding, clothing, and other financial requirements. After she is married, it is the duty of the husband or the son. A woman can even demand from her husband to seek an education. She does not have to rely on her father for that. If she wants to study more, her husband will have to provide for it. And she can take it to court and ask the Qazi for help in this manner, because this is her right. Islam holds the man financially responsible for fulfilling the needs of the family, and whatever a man earns, he must use it to provide for his family. But the catch here is that whatever a woman earns is solely for her use as she sees fit. She does not need to share it with the family. If she wants to, she can. But she can use her money wherever she wills. She will be completely within her rights to use whatever money she earns for herself, for her children, for anything. So the responsibility of earning lies on the man. So this provides women great freedom. Rights which to date have not been implemented in the Western society. And these were rights given 1400 years ago. In terms of inheritance rights, a woman gets inheritance from her family, although in generally half the portions than the men. But it is again something that is solely hers alone. And she can use it as and how she sees fit. And she has no financial responsibility on anyone. The men, on the other hand, do have that financial responsibility. So again, she is free from these things. If you look at it, there is benefit after benefit after benefit after benefit given to women in Islam. No other religion, even to date, can match that. And that's a fact. If you look at the social rights of women and how men should behave towards women, it has been mentioned in Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, verse 18, that, O you who believe, you are forbidden to inherit women against their will, and you should not treat them with harshness. So first of all, you cannot inherit women, which was the custom at that time, that women were passed on from one person to the next, from father to son, from one brother to the next. No, you cannot inherit women. They're not objects. They have a say in who they want to marry and who they don't want to marry. There is a hadith from Sahih Bukhari, narrated by a woman named Khansa bin Khidam al-Ansariya, who mentioned that her father gave her in marriage to a person who she disliked. And she went to the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and told him about this. And the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, cancelled that marriage. Because he knew that a woman cannot be forced into marriage, which is something which you will find even today in Muslim society, Muslims doing. This is against the teachings of Islam, full stop. The consent of both parties has to be there. So one of the most common misconceptions that the Western world might have about Islam is also this. And this is because of our cultural beliefs, not something that has been recommended by Islam at all. In Islam, men and women have been asked to collaborate and consult with one another, as it has been mentioned in Surah Tawbah, chapter 9, verse 71. The believing men and women are associates and helpers of each other. They collaborate to promote all that is beneficial and discourage all that is evil, to establish prayers and give charity and obey Allah and His Messenger. Those are the people whom Allah would grant mercy. Indeed, Allah is mighty and wise. Now coming to the aspect of divorce, you will find very harsh opinions in many of the religions across the world, whether or not women even have the right to divorce or not. If you look at Christianity, for example, in Matthew chapter 5, verse 32, it has been mentioned that, but I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for marital unfaithfulness, causes her to become an adulteress. And anyone who marries the divorced woman commits adultery. Look at the pressure. Look at the sheer pressure that is laid on the woman. That first of all, you cannot divorce a woman unless she has been unfaithful. And if a woman has been divorced, she is an adulteress. And if a man was to marry her, it would be as if he was committing adultery. So a divorced woman is something that society will not touch. She will be let go to do whatever she pleases. No man will come near her. This is the status of women in Christianity. If you look at Judaism, in the Talmud, in Gittin 90a to b, it mentions, the school of Shammai held that a man should not divorce his wife unless he has found her guilty of some sexual misconduct, while the school of Hillel say he may divorce her even if she has merely spoiled a dish for him. Rabbi Akiba says he may divorce her even if he simply finds another woman more beautiful than she. These are the teachings of Judaism. That you can divorce a woman if she puts more salt in your food. You say just divorce. You can divorce a woman simply because you find another woman more attractive. These are the teachings of Judaism.